Hello, everybody. Welcome, all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today for this wonderful conversation on food and faith. My name is Michael Gribov. I am the Director of Engagement and Development at Jewish Veg. I want to welcome everyone to the event. We're very excited to have all of you here with us today. Let us know where you're from in the chat. If you can share your veg journey and your spiritual journey with us. Hello, Patricia. Hello from San Diego. Hello, Beth from New York City. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Hello, Anshia from Los Angeles. Great to have you with us. And if you have any questions, comments, want to bring those into the stream. Hello, Allison from Baltimore. Great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Perfect. So I also, we're going to have a survey and a giveaway. Maurice from New York. Hello. Thank you for joining us. I know you're on the road. Barry from London. Awesome. Great to have you. We've got an international audience with us today. So we're also going to have a survey and a giveaway. I'll mention that a little bit later. But first, I just want to introduce Jewish Veg for those of you who are not familiar with our work already. Jewish Veg is the Jewish voice of the plant-based movement. So some of you may know last year we celebrated our 45th year anniversary. So for nearly half a century, we really helped to lead and mobilize this movement with our mission to inspire people to embrace the plant-based lifestyle as an expression of Jewish values of compassion for animals, care for our health, and our environment. And what we do is we create a kinder and healthier and more sustainable world through four holistic levels. One is immersive personal experiences, like our Plant Pathways program, which we'll talk about at the end. Number two is engaging institutions through our Speakers Bureau. Number three, building community through our chapters throughout the country. And number four, leading public campaigns to shift our food culture. And a good example of that those public campaigns is what we've done with the Pandemic Free World campaign. So you can go to this website right here on pandemicfree.org. This is our Pandemic Free World campaign. You can see exactly what we're doing. Basically, what this is doing is this is connecting the issues of this pandemic to our food system, because a lot of people still don't realize, but the reason that we have this pandemic in the first place, the reason that coronavirus is here today, is because of a broken food system that is unfortunately creating a lot of these pandemics. This is not the first pandemic connected to our food system, and it's not going to be the last. A lot of people don't realize that we have in our power as individuals and as a society to shift our food culture so that we can prevent these pandemics from happening again by going to a plant-based food system and adopting plant-based diets, and also strengthen our own selves, our own health, by enabling us to get through this pandemic by adopting a plant-based diet, which reduces chronic diseases and heals us from chronic diseases, which is the major risk factor for mortality from COVID-19. And as part of this campaign, we are leading a coalition of organizations. You can see some of them right there. Thank you so much for your support. I want to thank all of our partners and our organizations, foundations, corporations, nonprofits that are joining us in this campaign. And a major supporter and partner in this campaign is the VegFund. The VegFund sustains the global plant-based movement in more than 30 countries with their support for campaigns that bring us closer to a pandemic-free world. And we are honored by our partnership together to inspire people to transform our planet with their food choices. So I'm honored today to invite and welcome here our my co-host today, Stephanie Redcross West, the the president of the board of directors of the VegFund. Since 2009, Stephanie has also been the founder and managing director of Vegan Mainstream, a unique marketing consulting company for vegan entrepreneurs all over the world. And if you can unmute yourself, Stephanie, and she's also been a frequent speaker at Veg Fests and conferences. So we're very excited to have you here with us. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's so great to be here. And thank you for the opportunity to co-host with you. It's such an honor to have today's discussion and dive into food and faith.
Absolutely. Well, the honor is all mine, is all ours. And I just want to have you say a few words about VegFund. You know exactly what VegFund does because they've been so supportive of us and so many other organizations that are really leading this movement with us. If you could say a few words about VegFund and also about what you do, would love for our audience to hear that.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for the opportunity. I think here at VegFund, we're really kind of in awe of the diverse content, discussions, community outreach, and everything that's really been championed by Jewish Veg. So it's exciting to see how religious organizations, interfaith groups are kind of expanding their reach of veganism and bringing it into their communities. So it's a privilege for me and really for the entire VegFund team to be able to support Jewish Veg and obviously today's initiative and other groups that we've supported over the years. As many of you probably know out there, or maybe there's a couple of people who haven't heard of VegFund yet, we're really truly dedicated to funding global activism. We also spend a large amount of time with capacity building. What we want to do is help individuals and organizations to really expand the impact of their messaging out in the world. We're often known for doing a lot of micro grants, for individuals, partnering with organizations, and really trying to help inspire people to take activism into their communities, into their really passions, and help people who want to do something even as simple as a virtual film festival screening, anyone who wants to do something as far as host events. While we were all out in the world, we were hosting special events, conferences, individuals doing food sampling. Now that we're in this kind of post-pandemic world, or I would probably say maybe we're in the middle of it right now, what we're trying to do is help people virtually continue to get those messages out there and continue to change the world. We know at times people need funding to make this happen. And what we try to do at VegFund is step in and not only be that financial resource, but also be a resource as far as comparing, collaborating, and sharing information among our activists. So really excited to be here today. And I'm hoping that maybe today we inspire a couple of people. And if so, we'd love for you to come visit us at vegfund.org/apply in case we can help you with your next endeavor.
Thank you so much. And thank you for VegFund for all of the support that you've given to Jewish Veg and to the broader plant-based movement. And speaking of inspiration, inspiring people, we want to hear from you what you think about this event. Want to hear from you, and we will be distributing a survey connected to this event. And as part of the survey, we are also doing a giveaway. So our giveaway today is Jewish Veg hoodies. This is some of the cool days are still ahead. So this is a great addition to your closet. For everyone who completes the survey, you'll be entered to win an opportunity to win Jewish Veg hoodie, which is a fantastic thing. And we really want to hear your thoughts. It really helps us to continue to innovate and serve the community, which is really important. So if you registered for the event, you will get the link to the survey. If you did not register for the event and you're viewing the event afterwards, within a few days of the event, you can also click on the link in the description and go to the survey and fill that out, and you'll be also entered into an opportunity to win. So this event is also really designed to be interactive. So again, let us know where you're from and share your spiritual journey with us. Please put your comments and questions in the live chat, as many of you have been doing. We'll pull them into the screen and we'll address them as we go. So please let us know what's on your mind. And I want to just highlight a few comments that we got recently. Beth from New York, thank you so much for joining us and registering. Constance, also from New York, heartened to hear that this connection is happening. It's so important, to connect our faith and our food. They really are connected. Therese from Hawaii, wonderful. Congratulations on your 1-year vegan anniversary. And Helen from Arlington, Massachusetts. This is absolutely the nourishment that we need right now. Ashley from Fort Collins, Colorado. Really appreciate you being here. Wanda from Youngstown, Ohio. I've spent a lot of years in Cleveland, Ohio, so appreciate that. And Shaheen from Washington, D.C. Represent Washington. I'm in the D.C. area myself. I think you are as well. Oh no, Stephanie, you're in Florida. So yeah. I'm in D.C. right now. So that's great for you to be here. Just a few words about the event. So we're having this during Veganuary. Veganuary is a global movement to help people transition and embrace veganism during January. So those veganism, January, Veganuary, that's how it came to be. And we'll be having an interfaith discussion on the Judeo-Christian imperative for a plant-based lifestyle. There's also, this runs the gamut for all faiths, all of the faiths that we share, from Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and on. They all actually point to a compassionate food system, a compassionate plant-based lifestyle. And we will be hearing from our two wonderful speakers today, Jeffrey Spitz Cohan from Jewish Veg and Victoria Moran, head of Main Street Vegan, about how we can cultivate our beliefs and our diet to get close to Hashem, to get close to our Creator, to get close to God. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about this moment right here. Because tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day. And Dr. Martin Luther King said just some amazing things. And one of the things that he said was, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I just want to highlight that because the injustice of our factory farm system, of our food system, the cruelty and the injustice that is rife in the factory farms is absolutely atrocious, and it impacts everything that happens in the world, because we all eat food, we all are connected to the food system, and we have a direct impact on that through our food choices. So Stephanie, I just wanted you to talk about that, how a factory farm system that that is so unjust contributes to this. And no wonder Martin Luther King's widow and son are both vegan, and there's clearly a direct connection to social justice and to our food system. So how can veganism help advance justice, and how can our food system, how can we build a compassionate, anti-racist world, especially seeing what we've seen recently on Capitol Hill and throughout the world?
Well, I think some of it starts with us really redefining our roles, seeing ourselves as kind of ambassadors, whether we're vegan ambassadors, plant-based ambassadors, but really getting that reminder that we must shed light on injustice in all walks of life, and that we have to bring not only that compassion, that understanding, but also bring that action to social injustice. I think one thing that we all kind of struggle with at times is like veganism and the plant-based movement has like multiple entry points, kind of like a highway in a sense. And some of us join that highway through animal rights. issues. Some of us are joining that highway through environmental issues. Some of us are joining that highway because we had a health crisis or a health scare. And it's easy to compartmentalize the reason why we arrived. It's easy to kind of think that our impact has to be done in our circle or our area of specific influence. And I think today is a good time, especially as we're reflecting and thinking about ways that we can even honor Martin Luther King's memory on Monday, is to remind ourselves that veganism is truly a social justice movement. So if anyone's on that highway, I want you to switch lanes. I want you to jump into the learning lane sometimes. I want you to jump into that stand-up lane. Sometimes we have to be in the listening lane. And sometimes we have to find our voice. And I don't think it always has to be a traditional channel like protesting. That is great. And it's such a huge, impactful thing for our movement. But the idea is that we should bring that action. And what I want people to do is not ignore the violence, not ignore the discrimination, not ignore the systematic oppression, and bring that action into their lives. And some of that action maybe, and we'll even talk about it, I even think today, some of it's like small things. And Michael, I don't know your thoughts on that, but to me, sometimes the action is just having a movie night in your own home and watching some of these documentaries or subscribing to a podcast. Or if you're an organizer, you're going to sit down and look at your speakers and make sure they're diverse. Make sure, messages are coming through diverse audiences and individuals. And even if it's just your own Facebook page or profile, as you're discovering movies, as you're learning and being educated, share those with individuals. Because I think the more that we're active, the more that we're open to this discussion, even though it's a little bit painful and sometimes even uncomfortable, what we can be is truly be those ambassadors and remember to make sure that we are active in all of the vegan social justice movements.
That's right. You couldn't have said it better. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for leading us through that, because this is it's such a difficult time right now for our nation and for the world. That's in the middle of a pandemic and seeing all the racism and hatred in our world. The one thing that we can all do 3 times a day, every single day, we have, we do it anyway, is contribute to a compassionate world, a compassionate food system through our choices, by choosing veg, by choosing a plant-based lifestyle, as opposed to, harming innocent beings and innocent animals. So really appreciate your thoughts there.
And I love what you're saying, because I think one thing that I hope people take away from today is the idea is that the action is within our own grasp. Sometimes we think it's like an organization or this group over here can make that change. But the idea is that we can make that change in those choices every single day when we're making our food choices, every single day when we're deciding, what organizations we donate to, volunteer with. The idea is that that choice is within reach. And that I think that's one thing that's really exciting for me.
Thank you so much, Maurice, for your contribution there. Yeah, it's some of us are here on this journey, just a few months. Others are here, years and years. But most of us have not been born vegan. Most of us grew up in the society. We, are eating animals and we're eating fish and dairy. And all of a sudden, there's this wake-up call. Wait a sec, we're harming ourselves, we're harming the world, we're harming the animals. How is this contributing to violence and hatred? And it's all in our grasp. And we are not alone. There's a whole positive, compassionate, supportive movement and community that we should all be connected to. And really appreciate all of you here being here with us today. Thank you, Coral from England for joining us on this. Absolutely, there is just so much that we share between our faiths and between our food system that we all share. So, and thank you, Michelle. 21 years. That's fantastic. Unbelievable.
Oh, that is amazing.
It's quite. It was before the movement took off. In the last several years, it really skyrocketed. But a lot of us, I think, are really discovering that there's so much out there in this movement. Thank you so much, Chantal. Beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So wanted to now bring our guests on the stream. I want to welcome Jeffrey Spitz Cohan and Victoria Moran. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Great to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you, Stephanie. What a great way to start this program.
Thank you. It's great to see you.
Fantastic. Well, Stephanie, do you want to kick us off on the panel discussion, or do you want me to ask if you
Absolutely. I think definitely. Let's kick things off. And I think maybe a good place to start, especially maybe Jeffrey and Victoria, if you're both willing to chime in. I think one place for us to talk about is the impact of our diets, especially when we think about our spiritual growth and our relationship with God. I think it's a good place for us to maybe hear your perspective, because some people out there in the audience may love to know where that impact lies and where that growth could go. Victoria, do you want to start us off? And then Jeffrey,
sure.
I'll come to you.
Thank you. Oh, thanks everybody, and thanks for including me in this. This is really my combined passion, the idea of spirituality and the idea of veganism, of a kinder and gentler world. There's a quotation from Charles Fillmore, who founded the Unity Movement, a very progressive Christian denomination that started back in the 1890s. He and his wife were very vocal vegetarians. And he said there's a relationship between thinking and eating. And as you grow spiritually, the character of your food and all that pertains to eating may have to be changed in conformity to the new order of things. And I think it happens in a really interesting way with veganism, that sometimes our spiritual growth precedes the veganism, and sometimes the veganism precedes the spiritual growth. And for me, because I started on this path really young, I was 19 when I went vegetarian and struggled with veganism for several years, but finally managed to get there in my early 30s. And it was never not part of my spiritual life, because even when it was difficult, and back in the early days, we didn't have convenience foods and soy milk and things like that. It was a little tough, but I always knew that it was God's will for me. And another quotation that's one of my favorites comes from Bill W., the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, either God is everything or else he is nothing. And if we really believe that God is everything, that will of God has to infuse our food choices as well.
That is so wonderful. I mean, it just, I can feel it resonating in me when you said that quote. Like, I'm almost still digesting it. I don't know if anyone out there that's listening as well, if they're feeling that process. And maybe while I continue to digest it, Jeffrey, do you want to chime in and talk about kind of the impact of diet and spiritual growth on the relationship with God?
Jeffrey, you're muted, so if you want to unmute yourself a little bit. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Michael. Victoria is a pretty hard act to follow, but I'll give it a shot. One thing that surprised me after going vegan about 9 years ago, although I subsequently discovered it's a very common experience for vegans, which is you start to feel the unity of all existence. When you look at an animal, you feel a connection that you didn't feel before you were vegan. And it's an incredibly spiritual experience to realize we're all in this together. And none of us really understand what it's all about. We're all trying to get by, to flourish, and we're all in this together. And it shouldn't have come as a complete shock, because about 100 years ago, Franz Kafka, the great Jewish novelist who wrote Metamorphosis and several other great novels, he himself went vegetarian, and perhaps he would have gone vegan I think he would have been vegan if the term vegan even existed at the time. But Franz Kafka famously said, after his transition to a meat-free diet, he described looking at a fish in an aquarium and saying to the fish, now I can look you in the eye. Now I can look you in the eye. So this is exactly what Franz Kafka was talking about. Spiritually, when we go vegan, we start to see that we're part of a unified existence. That's a very powerful spiritual experience.
It is. It can be really transitioning when you start to understand your role in that connection with others. And I'm even hoping maybe our audience today who's participating, they're feeling that connection too. They're starting to feel maybe that spark, whether they're new to this road of being plant-based or if they've been doing it for a while. Now, Michael, do we have some questions that maybe we want to throw towards our panelists?
Yeah, I actually have, and guys, if you, as you're watching this, if you have any questions that you want to ask our panelists, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll bring them on the screen. But I do have a question actually for Victoria. Joseph from Accokeek, Maryland, asked about personal metrics for food and faith. How can we measure if we're making progress spiritually? Would love to hear your thoughts on that, Victoria.
What a great question. I also need to say, for anybody that doesn't know me, that I've been on a spiritual path my whole life. I was this crazy little kid that would go in and borrow the mysticism books from a friend's mother's library, and also got a degree in comparative religion. So some of this stuff I have heard, and some of it, kind of comes from the heart, as I'm sure so many of you here know. There is this direct connection that we all have. Well, someone, Joseph, asked this exact question of the psychic Edgar Cayce, and he said, you should ask your family, that they probably know what kind of spiritual growth you're making. And it is very interesting. I knew a gentleman back in my hometown of Kansas City who started meditating after he had had a heart attack and bypass surgery. And later on, the meditation kind of fell by the wayside. And one day his wife said to him, I wish you'd go back to meditating. And he was so surprised because he didn't know that she knew that he'd stopped, but his behavior indicated that. And I think that's what we really need to look at as vegans. How are we shining our light out into the world? And other people will see it. Sometimes they'll tell us, sometimes they won't. But it's pretty obvious that we're kind of billboards for our way of life. And whether that's for spirituality in general, or a particular spiritual path, or whether it's for being vegan. So I think that in terms of knowing how well we're doing, we just need to put in the work. It's sort of like, how can you tell how well you're doing on your job? Well, you show up every day, you do the very best you can, and then maybe you'll get an evaluation twice a year or something like that. But basically, all you can do is your very best every day. And I think that's the same way it is with growing spiritually. The kinder and the more disciplined we can be, I think we're going to make a lot of progress.
Fantastic, fantastic. No, that's a beautiful response. I think we just it's about seeking and striving and making those inroads every day. And one thing that can help us with that path, with that spiritual path, are resources and documentaries that have been developed for the movement and for those with a spiritual inclination and a spiritual bent. And one documentary I really want to highlight here today is called A Prayer for Compassion. So A Prayer for Compassion is probably the only film I think ever made that looks at the intersectionality of food and animals from an interfaith perspective, looking at how all of these different faiths actually point us to embrace a plant-based diet for spiritual reasons, not just health or whatever, but for spiritual reasons, for spiritual growth. I want to play some beautiful clips that we have from this film. This film was created by Victoria Moran, and Jeffrey Spitz Cohan from Jewish Veg is one of the folks that are included in this film. And we had a great question that came in about this event from Ian from Memphis, Tennessee. What sources are there for veganism in traditional Jewish thought? And so I'm going to play this clip for you guys that kind of answers some of the part of that question. And Jeffrey, you can probably add to it afterwards. But I think this clip from the film, and you can definitely check out the film. It's a beautiful, beautiful documentary. I think this clip really addresses that question that was brought up.
Genesis 1:29 is part of the first conversation between God and human beings recorded in the Bible. And God tells Adam and Eve, you are to eat the plants and the seed-bearing fruit, period. And immediately after that, God says, and it was very good. And it's the first time in the creation story that God describes creation as very good, tov ma'od. Up until that point, God just says, it's good, it's good, it's good. But when we get the instructions to eat a plant-based diet, now creation is very good.
After Rooterville, we drove Sophia up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we spoke with Jeffrey Cohan, the executive director of Jewish Veg, whose mission it is to help Jews to embrace plant-based diets as an expression of the Jewish values of compassion for animals, concern for health, and care for the environment.
Considering what Genesis 1:29 said, it got me thinking, what does the rest of the Bible say? Why aren't all rabbis and clergy and ministers vegetarian or vegan if this is what it says in Genesis 1:29? So I started reading, researching, and to my pleasant surprise, it's actually a pretty consistent theme in the Bible, that a plant-based diet is the ideal, that meat eating, while permitted, is usually framed in a fairly negative and sometimes extraordinarily negative light, and that we're supposed to be treating animals not just with compassion, but with exquisite sensitivity. You know, there's a whole slew of verses in the Bible that command that we treat animals with such sensitivity. Collectively, these are known in Hebrew as tsar ba'alei chayim, which translates to the prevention of suffering to animals. And it says in our Talmud, which is the main rabbinic commentary on the Bible, that not only are we to prevent animal suffering, we are to relieve the suffering of animals whenever we have occasion to do so. And on that basis alone, given how animals are treated today in modern animal agriculture, there's no way we should be consuming animal products.
That is such a beautiful, beautiful summary of so much that is embedded. Thank you, Donatello. Great to see you. Thank you for joining us. And Jonathan, good to see you as well. And Sean, thank you so much. Yeah, it's a really beautiful documentary. I really encourage you guys to view it. But Jeffrey, I wanted to see if you can expound on that and tell us how did you first discover that biblical imperative for a plant-based diet? And you know, there's just so much in the Bible that really speaks to that.
Thanks for the question, Michael. Before I answer the question, I want to thank Victoria for producing this documentary, because it was quite a project with Victorian filmmaker Thomas Wade Jackson. And this was a documentary that was begging to be made and needed to be made, because there's no documentary like it that explores the intersection of religion and veganism like A Prayer for Compassion. I first discovered this. It's kind of funny because, as you heard me say in the documentary, it's right there in the first chapter of Genesis. Genesis 1:29. You don't have to go too deep into the Bible to discover it. But and certainly, I had come across it previously. I don't know why I didn't make the connection earlier. I certainly wish I had. But 1 year is about, it was about 10 or 11 years ago now. I was in synagogue. The Torah reader read Genesis 1:29. And I looked at my wife, or she looked at me, and we both said, well, it looks like we're supposed to be vegetarians. And we went vegetarian on the spot and subsequently, thankfully, vegan. But it did get me curious. As I say in the film, what does the rest of the Torah say? Or the Bible. And the interesting thing is, Genesis 1:29 is not the exception. It's more the rule. That's followed up with multiple verses in the Bible that all point towards a vegan diet.
I think you're muted, Michael.
That is so amazing to hear. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for sharing that. And I also want to play. Great point. That we all need to be, as Allison said. Sometimes we all need to be reminded of that. The fact that there is this strong push and imperative in the Bible for a plant-based diet, and that Hashem Elohim, that God wants us to follow this path, to connect with Him. And I want to also kind of broaden the discussion to some other religions, and play a clip for you guys, another clip from the same film, Prayer for Compassion, from Victoria, which talks about kind of the broader theme and elements that unify these different faiths.
While we were in Manhattan, we stopped by to see Victoria, who told us about a cow she met many years ago during her visit to a slaughterhouse in southern Missouri.
I meet a lot of people who say, well, I only eat humane meat. I only eat meat from small family farms. Well, these cows came from a small family farm. The farmer drove them in himself. You could tell that these cows knew people and trusted them. So the first couple just walked up the chute and on to death, but the third one was not having any of it. She saw her friends go first. She heard the screams and she smelled the smells that I'd been smelling all day. She was not about to walk up that ramp. So she just planted herself and stood there. And the man up at the top of the ramp, about time to go home, he was ready to go see his kids. He whistled to her. He whistled to her the way he'd whistle to his dog when he went home in 20 minutes. And this cow seemed to trust him. She kind of turned her head and looked at him, and it was as if she was deciding whether or not to override all her instincts, what she was hearing, what she was smelling, and instead do something that we pride ourselves as humans in being able to do: trust another person. So with this trust, misplaced as it turned out, she walked to the man who had whistled to her. He got her with the captive bolt pistol. She was hoisted up, her throat was slit, her beautiful skin was sliced off her and into a pile to go for shoes and boots and belts and handbags. And all of a sudden, she was no longer a being. She was in the process of becoming beef. Now, I knew that in a few days, her parts and pieces would wind up at a supermarket in St. Louis. They would be on a styrofoam tray and cellophane wrapping, and they would be purchased by good people. They'd be purchased by people who love their children and give to charity and go to church. Well, they didn't know her. I did, for just a few minutes at the very end of her life. But because I knew her, it's my obligation to share her story.
It's such a powerful story, and something that, thank you for that, Heidi. It's something that really, that touches us so deeply. And I want to play just another really quick clip that talks about the different faiths and how they kind of come together, again, from Victoria.
I personally don't understand why some of the people that I admire the most, people whose words and whose writings I completely revere, are eating our fellow creatures.
Victoria Moran is a much sought-after speaker, best-selling author, and host of the Main Street Vegan podcast. She's been an animal rights activist and vegan for over 30 years.
A great deal of spirituality is about belief. That's why we call it faith. I'm a person of faith. I'm a Christian, a yogic Christian, and yet I understand that there are people who have other spiritual beliefs and other spiritual views. So what can bring all spiritual people together as a whole believing community? To me, that is compassion. Because compassion is at the center of the message of Jesus. It's compassion that got the Jews out of bondage and to the promised land. We have all the Eastern religions that are ahimsa-based, nonviolence-based. So can we all agree that however we see God, however we see the road to salvation, being compassionate to one another and expanding that compassion out to all that has life is the true essence of spirituality? What else could it possibly be?
So Victoria, after watching that clip, help us understand, how do you connect God through your food?
Jesus said something that every time you eat and drink, do this in remembrance of me. And I think that the traditional Christian church has taken that and applied it to Holy Communion. But it sounds pretty clear to me that that one great prophet of God was saying there, every time you eat and drink anything, do that in remembrance of me. And I think in many religions around the world, there are all kinds of ways that food is sanctified. I mean, certainly there are the kosher laws within Judaism that Jeffrey can address. There are all sorts of rules in the Hindu tradition where vegetarianism is highly recommended. And it's because if indeed God is everything or nothing, then every action that we have is communication with God. And I've heard it said that the most intimate act any human being ever performs is to eat food, because that food is going to quite literally and physically become who we are in our physical expression on earth. So if we're taking in the pain and the terror of an animal that was killed, if we're taking in substances, dairy, for instance, that is wonderful for a baby calf, but completely inappropriate for a human of any age, then we're simply not going to function as well in our daily lives. And if we are here to know and do God's will, then there's going to be a little bit of, I think, disconnect in the messaging. So I quote Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who's a controversial character from the Theosophical movement of the 1800s, but she did say something that was rather apropos. Someone said, well, what's wrong with eating meat? And she said, well, I don't know that there's anything wrong with it, but of course it shuts down your spiritual growth. Well, I think there's plenty wrong with it, and having it shut down your spiritual growth is one of those things.
Yeah, I think that's so important that we realize that we want to grow, that we want to be better. And the idea is that our choices that we make every day can help us do that. And we have to make sure that we're not making these disconnects. We're not pulling apart our everyday actions from our spiritual beliefs, but understanding that our food is an expression of that. So thank you so much, Victoria, for sharing that. And I know a few people, we had a question, I think, a few people after maybe seeing some of these clips were hoping that they could potentially watch A Prayer for Compassion. Is there an option where they can watch it online? Can they get it from libraries or Netflix?
Yeah, thank you, Mindy, for that question. Go ahead, Victoria.
It's on Vimeo and it's also on Amazon. And I will search for those links and put them in the chat. And also, if anybody still watches DVDs, you can go to the website of prayerforcompassion.com and order a DVD.
Fantastic. Yeah, and what I would add is if you would like to bring this film to your community, what we've been doing at Jewish Veg is hosting live viewings of the Prayer for Compassion, combined with kind of something like this, a conversation with some of the people involved in the film, the producers of the film, like Victoria, and speakers and leaders like Jeffrey Spitz Cohan here. So if you would like to bring this film to your community, your synagogue, your JCC, what have you, we would be happy to collaborate with you and to make that happen, to not just view the film, but also have a discussion together with some of the leaders from this documentary.
And it's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that you are doing that, especially in today's day and age where, we used to gather together for film screenings, and being able to bring not only this online, but to have that discussion piece, I think is key, because when we're trying to have that growth, sometimes we have questions, sometimes we need clarity. And it's great when we can all come together as a group, as well as, VegFund is always excited about being able to sponsor and support those as well.
And we have a question from Gary Silver. How do we respond when people also point out the cruelty in the Bible with animal sacrifices, honoring guests by killing an animal for dinner, etc.? These are really challenging questions. Jeffrey, I think you're...
sorry. Okay, I got it. You can go to our website, and we do address this question in our FAQs because it's a great question and it comes up in our presentation. It's usually the first question people ask. I'll tell you what Maimonides, the great Jewish 13th century scholar, had to say about this exact issue. He said, the only reason the sacrifices appear in the Bible is because at that point in history and at that location, there was no other way to practice religious worship. There were no churches, obviously, there were no synagogues, there were no prayer books. So Maimonides said the Jews would not have accepted the Torah at the time without some provision for sacrifice. What lends a great deal of credence to Maimonides' position is that the prophets railed against the sacrificial system is not what God wants. And I don't just mean one prophet. We're talking Isaiah, Micah, Amos. All these prophets that God does not want sacrifices. He wants good deeds. So the last point, there's more points I can make about the sacrifices, but there's a reason we haven't done it in 2,000 years. The rabbis made no effort to reinstitute sacrifices once we were expelled from Jerusalem in 70 AD. And there's a reason for that. And the prophets gave us the reason. It isn't what God ever wanted. The sacrifices were just put in there as a bridge to monotheism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way of saying it. Coral added the sacrificial system does not justify eating meat now. All of those sacrifices were only meant actually for the temple and the tabernacle, which are no longer around. So it's actually halachically, according to Jewish law, it is forbidden to have sacrifices now that we do not have the temple around. So thank you so much for that. We have two other questions we wanted to highlight. Oh, this is great, Jonathan. Good question. Yeah, I had similar one when the rabbi at my Chabad said a mitzvah to eat meat on Shabbat. How do I dispute this?
Thank you, Jonathan, for this question, because this one drives me nuts. For one thing, there is no mitzvah to eat meat. A mitzvah is a commandment. We are not commanded to eat meat. Secondly, what this Chabad rabbi that Jonathan is referring to is talking about, he's referencing Pesakim, which is a section of the Talmud, which says, and if the rabbi had read the entire section, he would know this. It says in Pesakim that in the days of the temple, you did enjoy Shabbat with meat. But now that the temple does not exist, we enjoy Shabbat with wine. So this idea that it's a mitzvah to eat meat on Shabbat is based on a partial reading of the exact section of the Talmud where this idea comes from.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's so true. And then another great question from Roberta. What do I say to friends who tell me that the Jewish laws for humane slaughter fulfill this need for compassion because they avoid suffering? What those laws are in the Torah as well?
Right, just quickly, these are such great questions. The kosher laws, which I think is what this question is about, were an attempt to make eating meat difficult because there's so many rules about kosher meat. The idea was to make it so difficult you wouldn't want to do it. But what ended up happening, unfortunately, is in our modern age, industrial agriculture is make kosher meat, and it's kosher only in the, I put it in quotes, only in the most technical sense. But it's made kosher meat readily available. This was not the case for 2,000 years. It was difficult to get kosher meat. There was a very limited supply, which was by design, because if the Jews were to eat meat, it was going to be difficult to do so.
That's a really great point. That we really weren't planning when the Torah was written, when the Bible was written. We were not planning for a mass factory farm system that slashes down forests to make room for 200 million cows, to graze, that feeds 7-8 billion people in the world. This was just not in the plan. And what we have today is just a desecration, of that original design. Any other comments that we have from the audience? I want to pull those in. This is great from Chantal. Why do you think that many religious or spiritual people have not made the connection between their faith and their food choices? A great question for, I think, all of us here.
Well, I'll jump in on that. I think sometimes we don't make the connection between our faith and a lot of things that we do in life. I think all of us can look back and say, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. That's not something that somebody who's on a spiritual path would do, but gosh, I did it. And so I think particularly so much is cultural. And I can see this in every culture that I have studied around the world, even when we have vegetarian leanings, vegetarian teachings in the predominant religions in those areas. Culturally, meat has gotten in there, and meat is high in fat and it's rich and people like it. We've heard it said that it really is an addictive substance. And so people start eating it, and it's very, very difficult to pull apart the religious teachings, the spiritual values, and this, well, we've always done it this way, and my pastor does it, and my grandfather did it, and he was a really holy guy, and it's so entrenched. And I think, like anything else, when we make these big decisions about where we come down on social justice issues, where we come down on this is the line in the sand, it's serving God or mammon, it's, eating meat or not doing that we just have to draw in those teachings that we say are so dear to us, but they're very safely dear when we can keep them over here. When we actually have to change, it's really tough. Rachel Carson, I believe it was, said that it's easier to change a man's religion than to change his diet. And so it's one thing to say to all of our Facebook friends, there are some problems with, the companion animals needing homes. Will you sign this petition? We're trying to get rid of the carriage horses here in New York City. Can you help us out? And everybody's like, sure, because everybody thinks they like animals. But then you say, could you consider changing your diet? And very often a wall goes up. And I think just finally, the last thing I'll say is for us, because this is front and center and very present and very important. And we see how this has to do not only with the rights of non-human beings, but our own health, the state of the planet, the future of the planet. It's so important. But to most people out there, it's not even on the radar. When they list issues of importance, it doesn't make their top 10. So I think we have to be very, very strategic in how we get this message across to people, because they probably have never thought about it before.
That's right. There were a few.
I was going to just add to that a little bit, if you don't mind, only because I really love how Victoria framed that, because especially for myself, being African American, a lot of our foods are anchored in our culture. So even before we bring in the spiritual piece of it, sometimes what people really struggle with is, if I change the way I eat, am I giving up a piece of my culture? And then when you start to bring that together into your spirituality, what happens, or you bring it into your teachings, or you even just bring it into dinner that's served at the church, what happens is people start to feel like you're challenging their beliefs, as opposed to bringing a solution to the table that allows them to still enjoy their culture and bring their spirituality, their beliefs, their ethics together. So I think a lot of times it's how we present veganism, how we present plant-based diets, how we present these items to a lot of different communities, that we forget that we have to really customize it to that community, because otherwise people may feel like it's the wedge as opposed to the solution that allows them to still continue to express their culture.
That's a really beautiful way of putting it. It's so important to keep in mind. It's not just the message, it's how you deliver the message. That's sometimes even more important. And we had a question on this, connected to this, from Yael, Worcester, Massachusetts. How do you convert non-believers? By non-believers, she's not traditional, but she's talking about non-believers in veganism or vegetarianism. Would love to pose that to you guys.
Sure, say briefly, and Michael knows this so well since he's my colleague at Jewish Veg. The first thing we do when we talk to people, whether it's a group or an individual, is say, look, we're not trying to change your mind and we're not trying to change your beliefs. We're just trying to align what you already think and what you already believe with what you're doing. Because virtually nobody supports cruelty to animals. And most people care about the environment. And virtually everybody cares about their health. So it's just a matter of showing them how eating an animal-free diet doesn't require them to change their mind, which most people are very reluctant to do, including probably the four of us. But all it requires is aligning what you think with what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I really think that it's important for all of us to be bridge builders. I think sometimes when we think about converting and changing, that has a sense of force to it. That has a sense of kind of almost making a person move or bend to our will. And I think it's more important that we start to find that commonality, to find a place where what someone's position is or where they are and what your position is, where do you have that common goal? Where do you have that common vision? And as you start to bring those commonalities together, what happens is you've built a bridge with that person, with that community, with that group before you started to even introduce new ideas. And I think sometimes if we forget to build that bridge first, build that rapport, build an actual relationship, then the growth, the transformation can come from a strong relationship with organizations and groups, as opposed to coming in kind of wagging our finger and telling people where they're going wrong and how they should change.
And I just noticed a comment from Deanna in the chat that has something to do with this as well, that we need to reach people where they are. And I heard someone once say that when you're telling someone your vegan story, even if you're doing a very short version, if you say, you know, I lost 60 pounds and they're just like, who cares? Or you say, okay, and it just makes me feel so much better in relationship to non-human beings, and they're still like, who cares? And then you say, and you know that animal agriculture produces more greenhouse gases than all transportation combined, and then they're leaning forward like, what? Well, then you know the environmental argument, and I don't like that word argument, but the environmental issue is going to be one that speaks to these people. And I think at the end of the day, the best thing that we can do is to be what I call attraction activists. And that is that if we're living a life that works, if it's working on a spiritual level, if our relationships are working, if we really are showing that getting through this life, as difficult as it is in any circumstances, and in certain times in history like this one, harder than most. But if we can somehow, again, shine that light so that we're lifting other people up. And I kind of hesitate to use this example because it might be controversial, but I'm going to use it anyway. And that is, we've all seen Mitt Romney in recent years and in recent days do some things that I think most people feel exhibit courage and strength of character. And he happens to belong to a religious faith that has some questionable aspects, as I suppose all do, but certainly in terms of race relations, in terms of homosexuals, you know, not so great, historic and in the present. And that's one set of facts. Another fact is that someone who came from that has shown great character when he didn't have to. And I think that's what we need to do as vegans, because there are a lot of people who think that vegans are just odd. They think we're pushy. They think we have our priorities skewed, that we don't care about children and other people and other issues that they believe are absolutely more important. So if we can just be the best people that we can be, even though we're part of this group that a lot of people have questions about, I think it's going to push the cause and the issue further. And I think people are going to look into what we do with more of an open mind.
That's beautiful. I think we had a few other questions we wanted to highlight. There was one I saw from Kenneth. This is someone, if someone is vegan, are they still observing kashrut or kosher laws? This is a great question for you, Jeffrey. I know you have a great response to this as well.
Yeah, it's the ultimate type of kosher. In that, the typical kosher person needs 2 sets of dishes, one for meat and one for dairy. But when you're vegan, you don't. It's not a coincidence that's so much easier to be kosher when you're vegan. Just one more thing about kashrut, which I was thinking about after I answered the last question about it. The whole issue of kosher slaughter, it should be a moot point. And the reason I say that is, in Judaism and in any religion, you cannot have a good deed enabled by a sin, right? Whether you're Jewish, Christian, secular, it doesn't matter. You can't rob a bank to give charity. So the same thing applies here. Because the animals are being subjected to such pain and suffering before they get to the slaughterhouse, the method of kosher slaughter is a moot point. You have the Jewish law of the prevention of animal suffering has been violated. Or there couldn't be an animal to door the kosher slaughterhouse. So in a sense, not in a sense, in reality, no meat is truly kosher.
Yeah, that's so true. And this is not just us saying it. This is some very prominent rabbinical leaders that are saying it as well. David Rosen, the former chief rabbi of Ireland, said really exactly the same thing, that the ultimate form of kashrut is a plant-based diet, especially today when there's so much cruelty that contravenes all of the things that we believe in and are commanded to do in the Bible. There was another 1 or 2 good questions I wanted to bring up. Actually, the one from Beth, would you comment on no blessing for eating meat?
Right. Just real quick. In Judaism, there's a blessings for virtually everything. But certainly food. There's blessings over bread. There's blessings over fruits and vegetables. There's blessing for wine. But no, there's absolutely no blessing, specific blessing for meat. And several rabbis throughout the ages have stated the obvious. That you don't bless God when you eat meat. You don't make a specific blessing over the meat because God did not want people to eat meat to begin with, and does not. I shouldn't even use the past tense. God does not want people to eat meat. So why would there be a blessing for meat?
Exactly. Yeah. Jeffrey, I think you're frozen at the moment. If you want to try to restart, we'll try to get you back on the screen. But absolutely, such a critical point to make. I also wanted to highlight a question from, I think I saw one from Allison. That I will be happy to address. Right. Allison asked, can you speak about your pandemic-free world effort and how people can use it in their faith communities? And so she listed that's exactly the link. Also, pandemicfreeworld.org is a great way to access it as well. So if you are interested, if you're a part of a community, whether it's a synagogue, even church, community center, what have you, and you would like to have these discussions about the connection between this zoonotic pandemic that came from the slaughter and consumption of animals and our food system, and how we can actually bridge this gap and prevent future pandemics through our food system as individuals and as a community, then get in touch with us. Let us know what you would like to do, and we'll be happy to bring a speaker to your community to address this important point, how this pandemic is directly linked to our food choices and food system, and how as individuals and as a community, we really have a responsibility to address this pandemic through the daily choices that we make when we choose what we put on our plate, and how, if you're part of a faith-based community, how that also links to our values as faith-based leaders and members in society, and how our faith is also pointing us not to have pandemics and not to poison ourselves with animal-based products, but to be kind and compassionate and to follow a plant-based diet. I want, as we round out, so thank you so much for that, Allison. Really appreciate you highlighting that. I want to.
Do you have a chance to bring in that one question from Eve? Because I don't know if we talked about the health reasons around it as well, if you have a chance.
Yeah, that was Eve Miller. There's also, that's a great question. There are also health reasons for not eating meat, health problems, cholesterol, and other related to eating meat. These issues are easier to relate to for so many people who eat meat. It's true. I mean, my initial, my personal journey into this was for health reasons. I had high cholesterol, went to the doctor, and discovered that, the doctor's solution was pills and more pills, and then when those pills run out, we got a refill. And so it's just, our medical system is not equipped to deal with chronic diseases, not equipped to deal with heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cancer. All of these are linked to our diet and our food, and these doctors are not do not receive any training in nutrition in their medical school. So, but I would love to, for you guys to address that, and maybe Stephanie, you can speak to that as well.
Yeah, one other thing I even speak to is the idea of how important it is to bring it into our faith-based organizations, because if we're serving up the food that's making our congregation, that's making people unhealthy, we're not headed in the right direction. So the idea is bringing in education, even hosting cooking classes and teaching people how they can empower their health is so important, because it's such a shame. I find in a lot of communities, and especially for me and a lot of the African American community, we struggle with diseases like diabetes that's really hurting people. People are going blind from it, losing, a toe, or all these things that in some cases, and often in many cases, is very preventable. And if our churches were stepping up, if our pastors were stepping up and helping people make this connection, we could actually save lives. And I really think that's something for us to think about as we, even wrap up today's session and we think about food and faith, we think about the actions that we can take where we can help our congregation and help them live longer, live healthier lives, which can allow people to do even more in the world.
That's really beautiful.
And I would add to that, whenever we're bringing any kind of food into a religious setting, we're not stepping too far outside the norm when we talk about having that food be uplifting. I remember as a little girl growing up Catholic in the days when you would not go to Mass without wearing a hat and white gloves. It was just what you did. And that wasn't what I wore every day of the week. But I knew that in that particular context, I was supposed to do something extra. More was expected of me because this was church. And I think that we can bring into our religious institutions the idea of, people can eat whatever they want in their own homes, but because this is God's home, maybe we want to just up the ante a little bit. Another thing on the health I find fascinating is how many churches do Daniel fasts. So they take 21 days or 30 days to eat what Daniel did and his comrades, the pulses and vegetables and no strong drink, and come out healthier and more muscular at the end of it. I think it's funny that they call it a fast, because that means I've been fasting since 1983, which would be a miracle. And yet, if you know that there's a church or some other center in your world that has done this, maybe you could get in there to talk about, well, let's extend it. There are people who do this all the time, and look how well we do. And I think my final comment on that is, we talk about, there's kind of competition out there in the world of religions. It used to be everybody was born into a faith and they died in that faith. And now, people change around and people decide they don't want religion or faith in their lives in any way. But it's the same with diets. And we believe, well, certainly a plant-based diet and some healthy iteration of that is the way to go. And we have all sorts of scientific documentation to back that up. And yet just this year, January 1st, a survey came out among medical professionals of what is the best diet, and the Mediterranean diet won. Now, certainly you can have a Mediterranean vegan diet, but they weren't talking about that. And so I just think we need to know that when we go out there and present this stuff, if people don't just jump on it with great joy and glee the first time they hear it, it's because they're hearing all these other things. And we just need to be doing our thing, shining our light, being as healthy as we can be, being as kind as we can be, and answer the questions when asked.
That's right. That's right. I also want to ask, what can people do individually to pivot their diet and lifestyle to go veg? What can they do next as individuals to, if they're not on the journey yet, or if they're, in the middle of that journey, what can they do to advance that process?
I would say taking some of the foods that we celebrate in our culture, taking some of the foods that we celebrate as an expression of our religious beliefs, taking some of the foods that we use even in our family to bring and drive unity, and veganizing those. Because as we start to incorporate, a plant-based version of it, now what happens is that new version, that new concept of it brings along with it the positive vibes. It brings along that celebration. It brings along that idea that it still brings people together, brings our family together, and still allows you to express your culture. So I think that's a great first step, because it's a very positive step, and it's a step that allows us to kind of take things that we enjoy and maybe even indulge in quite often and associate it with kind of this plant-based diet.
I think it's about education and support. That first we need to really know. I know that as vegans, we just roll our eyes at the question, well, where will I get my protein? But the truth is we all have that question, because we've been trained by our society to have that question. So if you're new, you need to check out, where will you get your protein and calcium and iron and anything else that you're concerned about, and be solid. Just know that you're going to be fine, because until you know, you don't know. And then comes support. I believe that when they do studies about vegan recidivism, that more people leave because of relationship issues. They're the only vegan. They're so tired of their brother-in-law nagging at them at every family event. They don't like it that people tease them at work. These are difficult things. We're social creatures. We want to be accepted in the groups that we're in. And if you can get support from an organization like Jewish Veg, from in-person, when we're doing in-person again, and from online groups, just so that you know you're not the only person that watched that slaughterhouse video and it broke your heart. There are millions of people like you, and we're all here to offer support.
Jeffrey, you want to?
No, I do is Revin of what Victoria just mentioned. Our Plant Pathways program,
Yes.
which I'm sure we'll be sending a link to, when we email people after this event. Thank you, Mike. We didn't plan this, by the way. Good job, Mike. One of the key parts of this program is the communal aspect. It's the best we can do during the pandemic. So there's both regular Zoom meetings and there's a Facebook group, so that you're supported by a sense of community when you're on this journey. The second thing I would mention, not to minimize how daunting it might be, but the reality is this. Psychological research has shown time and again that any change that would improve our lives, whether it's exercising or saving money, people almost invariably overestimate how difficult it would be. This is no exception. Changing your diet, yes, it might seem daunting, it might seem challenging, but I can almost guarantee you it isn't as tough as you might think it is. And psychological research actually affirms this.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much. The final question I have for you guys is about your plans for 2021 and for the movement, and what it is you're planning, if you could share with us this year to advance and strengthen the plant-based movement.
Well, I'll start. I am first and foremost a writer, even though I do so many other things now. So my very most important resolution is to get busy and write my 14th book, which is a spiritually oriented book about ahimsa. So now that I've said it to all of you, I'll have to write it. But otherwise, I'm really feeling that God is pushing all of my activism and advocacy work more into the spiritual realm. And I invite people to check out the events at mainstreetvegan.net, which is my website, and you'll see all of these things. But I'll tell you just what's coming up really quickly. On March the 20th, I'm working with Yoga is Vegan and the Integral Yoga Institute on a day-long Zoom event called Yoga Goes Vegan, because they did invent ahimsa, and now we need to get the dairy out of the yoga. Then April 25th, the Compassion Consortium begins. And the Compassion Consortium is something started by three wonderful interfaith ministers. Two of them are here today, my husband, William Melton, and Reverend Sarah, I'm getting Bowen, Reverend Sarah Bowen, pardon me. And that's going to be a kind of spiritual hub for vegans that will have a once-a-month service and other support things going on besides. We're very excited. The website goes up in February. And finally, on May 16th, I'm working with Gwenna Hunter of Vegans for Black Lives Matter to do a retreat called Veganism and the Spiritual Life, because they really do connect. So mainstreetvegan.net, you can get information about all that stuff.
Fantastic.
Well, for me, it's really kind of, I straddle almost two worlds, I would say. I spend a lot of time in the kind of business realm. That's where I spend my day-to-day work with my company, Vegan Mainstream. And then I also obviously fulfill roles like being on the board with the VegFund, but also I continue to find ways for me to volunteer and support other initiatives. I'm working right now with the Divinity Coalition, where we're really making a plea to get Vice President-elect Kamala Harris to go plant-based. And what really gets me excited about joining some of these other coalitions and working is that idea of collaborating, the idea that we're starting to share ideas and information across kind of vegan individuals out there, whether we're in the kind of nonprofit world or in the business world. I think in the past, the idea is that we kind of had that separate mission or separate opportunity to change the movement. And what I really want to be a part of in 2021 is doing more collaboration, bringing those things together, and helping kind of building communities of support. Now, my day-to-day role is helping people who want to start businesses or align their careers with veganism. But I do that because I really want people to be able to express their veganism, all day, not feel like they have to kind of check their veganism at the door when it's time to go to work. The idea is that their careers can be that expression of it. They can actually follow their dreams and passions. And I want to make sure I help people do that.
Fantastic. Jeffrey, if you wanted to add.
Sure, we have such big plans for 2021. There's so many things we can mention, but I'll mention one thing since it's going to be, or before we know it, the holiday in Judaism that is most observed. And this surprises people. It isn't Hanukkah. It isn't Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. It's Passover. More Jews do something for Passover than any other time of year. This year, for the first time in the organization's history, we're doing a virtual vegan Passover Seder that everybody, Jewish, Christian, or other, wherever you're located on the planet, you can participate. So I'm really looking forward to that. In details, and the RSVP link will be available within a week or two.
That is awesome. Fantastic. We do these vegan Passover Seders. Before COVID, we've done them in person, usually in 4 or 5 major metropolitan areas throughout the country, and people just come out in droves. Hundreds of people would participate in these. So this is an opportunity for everyone across the country and around the world to plug in and to experience a vegan Passover, still completely in accordance with all of the Jewish laws and traditions, and open to everyone, and experience it virtually in their own home through this virtual experience. So really looking forward to that. Just around the corner for us will also be the rabbinic statement. We are doing an updated rabbinic statement that will feature 150 rabbis that have signed on to the statement, encouraging Jews from all walks of life to embrace the plant-based diets in accordance with Jewish law and teaching. And these are rabbis from the Reform to the Orthodox and everyone in between that have come together and have signed on to the statement, encouraging everyone to do this. So if you'd like to bring these kind of messages and this movement into your community, into your congregation, your community center, let us know, and we'll be happy to get that ball rolling and ensure that you've got some really powerful speakers that can translate this message and bring it to your members. So with that, I want to thank everyone for participating. I want to remind you guys again that we are doing an impact survey for this event. So if there's a description of the impact survey for the event. If you've registered, you'll also receive a link to it in your email today. Please fill that out, and when you do, you will be entered to win our giveaway, which is the Jewish Veg hoodie. And also, I want to just say that all of our work is supported by individual donors like you, who appreciate the importance of our mission to encourage people to embrace the plant-based diet for our health, for our world, for the animals, for our environment. And if you want to become part of this work, if you want to become part of this community, I encourage you to lend your support and become a member of Jewish Veg by going to jewishveg.org/member. And becoming part of this work and supporting this community. So thank you so much for your help. Anything that you guys want to add for our audience, for our listeners before we go?
Go vegan. You're doing God's work.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, guys. Great. Thank you, Barbara, Wanda. We've had so many great participants on this event. Went a little longer than I expected, but such a beautiful and powerful discussion. I thought it was really important that that we keep that going. So great job, everyone, and looking forward to our upcoming events and all of the great work that is up ahead for us in 2021. Thank you.